The Supreme Court issued a tax decision today. Why it's pretty good news for those of us who pay taxes. Hi, it's financial planner Sean Mullaney. Let's discuss. So previously on the channel, I have discussed Moore versus the United States, in which two taxpayers sued the federal government for a refund of taxes due on something called a mandatory repatriation tax. You can look at my earlier video to get some background on the case. Now today, June 20th, 2024, the Supreme Court came out with a decision against the Moores and for the federal government. And kudos to the Moores for exercising their right to challenge the IRS's determination in the case. Unfortunately for them, they did not win. But there's a few breadcrumbs in the decision that I think are actually somewhat taxpayer favorable. The case deals with this thing called realization, right? Essentially, in order for an income tax to be valid, in my opinion, and the opinion of many commentators, the income must be realized. But there are some out there challenging that assertion. And it was interesting because this case gave the Supreme Court an opportunity to definitively weigh in on that question. In fact, one of the appellate circuits, the Ninth Circuit, basically said income did not need to be realized. Well, interestingly enough, the Supreme Court did not definitively weigh in on that question. Does income have to be realized in order for the income to be taxed to an American person? However, 4 justices basically came out for that proposition very boldly, and only 1 justice came out against that proposition. So the case was decided 7-2, and there's a majority opinion by 5 justices, and that opinion basically says, well, guess what? There was realization in this case, so don't worry about realization. And we're not even going to weigh in this case on anything beyond basically the mandatory repatriation tax or something like it. And we're not going to address the realization question. Okay, so they just sort of said it happened. We don't have to weigh in on it. Okay. But then there were 3 other opinions, 2 concurring opinions and 1 dissenting opinion. One of the concurring opinions was from one of the liberal justices, Justice Jackson, and she very specifically says that realization is not required for an income tax to be valid, right? So that's -1 for those of us who support realization. Okay, well then let's look at Justice Barrett, Amy Coney Barrett's concurring opinion. That opinion said that realization is very much required, and it was joined by Justice Alito. So now we got 2 for realization, 1 against realization. And then we have the dissenting opinion by Justice Thomas, joined by Justice Gorsuch, saying that absolutely realization is required for an income tax to be valid in the United States. So that means that 4 justices, Justice Barrett, Alito, Thomas, and Gorsuch, are now on the record definitively saying that in order for an income tax to be valid in the United States, it must require realization. And only 1 justice on the record saying that realization is not required. And I thought it was interesting because it wouldn't have taken much at all for the other 2 liberal justices, Justice Sotomayor and Justice Kagan, to say, you know what, we'll join you, Justice Jackson, in that concurrence, which didn't say a whole lot other than realization is not required. Isn't that interesting that when the justices had an opportunity to weigh in? Now, I will say it's somewhat disappointing that more justices didn't come out for realization, but that only 1 of the 9 justices came out against realization means I think in the future, if this is adjudicated, it could be that realization is very much upheld as being required for a tax to be valid as an income tax in the United States as a federal tax. Where could this come up? In theory, if there was ever a wealth tax or a unrealized gain tax where, hey, you know, you've owned XYZ company stock for 20 years, it's had this huge capital gain, we're just going to tax that currently without you selling it. At that point, if you had a mark-to-market tax, at that point, this could become very relevant. So a loss for the Moores, and I would argue that from a realization perspective, which I think is the right answer and very important for taxpayers, realization is up 4-1. Now, that's not a definitive win, but we're ahead in the game. Hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please mash that like button and subscribe to my channel. I'll see you next time.